So, very simple topic around consuming versus sharing. Do you share every page you visit? I think the answer to that is a pretty resounding no for everyone. So, I wanted to dig into what that means. So, there's two fundamental problems with targeting consumers based on their public behavior and interest on social media. There's two main areas: people like people and consumers' public personas. So, I've heard a lot over the last few days of people talking about Facebook's interest graph, which I think is fundamentally flawed. And we'll talk about some other data that's out there and the differences in the way that you can understand consumers. So people like people. There's a premise that just because I like someone, I have similar interests to them. Again, fundamentally, that's flawed. Everything from alcohol tastes through to music. Just because you like someone doesn't mean you like exactly the same things as them. There's also the consumers' public personas. What's reflected through social media is not necessarily reflective of consumers' actual behavior, where they are in life stage, purchase stage, in the marketing funnel. It's very non-reflective of the real self. So a bit about why do we say this and how do we know? We curate discovery across the open web. So to give some context around that, we work in a discovery moment. So the moment you find something that you never knew existed. So that serendipitous point where you find a piece of content or you find an app or you find something that you weren't necessarily looking for, but is just right for you at that time. And it's interesting when you think about that moment, it's a very different mental moment. And it's when we tend to be a bit time rich. So that moment of when you find something new and you choose to invest in it is when we're normally open-minded, time easy, leaning in. And again, just to show for anyone who doesn't know who we are and where we are, we sit on the biggest publishers and the most premium publishers in the world, and we help those publishers recycle consumers through to other material from CNN, and at the same time, we look at promoted content from around the web. That can be traditional content, it can be product pages, it can be app downloads, it can be whatever we want. So it's just allowing consumers to find exactly what is right for them. We sit across the premium publishers across the region and internationally. I'd say we have three sets of publishers. You have the truly global brands like ESPN and CNN. You have the local brands such as all of the Straits Times titles, such as all of MediaCorp. And then you have what I call the international local brands. So the BBC for the Brits, Le Monde for the French, Der Spiegel for the Germans. So we sit across all of these sites. So anyone looking at those sites in these markets is seeing the local discovery that's promoted to them. And as I said, we promote the publishers, and that's how the business came about, was working with publishers so publishers could get more traffic and consumers would consume more of their content. And we also work with advertising as well. We often get characterized as the guys down the bottom of the page. And in many cases that's true, but what's good about that is it's actually where the attention is. Just by reading a headline of a recommendation with a brand name in it, there's 408% more recall than someone seeing an image in a banner ad or a display ad. So we've trained people to look at the what's next when they get to the end of a piece of content. We also sit across lots of other places, so top of page, in feed, in video, in app, so lots of placements, lots of places. One of the ways we think about this is Google is a directory. You know what you want, you go there, it's a very transactional moment. You find what you want or you don't find what you want. If you don't, you bounce back out, go to the search page, and then try again. We look at it more as a magazine, curation. It's the curation of what's out there. And so with that, you've got three major digital moments. You've got the search moment, that transactional moment I talked about. You've got what we like or people think we like. And you've got what we find interesting. And on that, again, we know what we're looking for with search. It's very transactional. Social, what we say we like and our friends share. And then discovery, very much what we don't know we're looking for. All of those moments happen natively, and that's really important. They happen in a way that the consumer feels is natural to the positioning that they are. So whether that's search, which is really the ultimate native placement, whether it's social, which is, again, all native, and whether it's discovery. Discovery also, if you go back and think about what I said about that moment of discovery, that serendipity of finding something that you weren't necessarily looking for, it's an experience. And that sets it out as different to other moments that you have online. We did some research recently, and we found, depending on age group, between 27 and 42% of what people find and what people consume online, they didn't set out to find. So that's where they've come across something they're interested in, they've spent time on it, but it's not something they'd set out to discover. So just to give some context around understanding and how we understand consumers, understanding content and how we understand the content, I wanted to share some slides with you. These are incredibly ugly slides because I took them from our tech department. So this is PowerPoint circa 98. I told you. So this goes through how we break down the content of an article. So you start off with proprietary taxonomy. That's effectively a tree structure that allows us to say an article is about business, it's about finance, it's about insurance. So that's a very top level, couple of hundred categories. Then you move on to the topic models. So that's thousands of topics that we pick up using our machine learning. You then have concepts derived from Wikipedia tags. So there's tens of thousands of those that exist that tie lots of different topics together. And then you have entities. Those entities might be places, they might be people. It depends completely. And what that does is it allows us to look at the difference in content that we're serving. So if I'm reading an article on Bali around travel, it's not going to get confused with an article about Bali talking about legislation that's being passed. And that's really important, being able to understand the mass of data, the mass of content we sit across. So if you look at a piece of very dry content like this, insurers shred Senate healthcare bill. The way that would work is proprietary taxonomy says it's business, finance, insurance. You have topic models, you have entities, and you have a wiki concepts. All of these tie together to give us a massive data set. On top of that, we track geo, device type, operating system, time of day, time on site, source, destination. So we have a huge depth of data that basically allows us to see what people are really consuming and what is their real interest graph. One of the things I was just chatting about on this is it also allows us to look at the difference of consumers in their purchase stage. So we understand with a consumer whether they're a phone geek who likes looking at new models of phone, or whether they're in the buying cycle and researching a phone because they want to buy one. So having this depth of data gives us a lot of context to look into. So we serve around 400 billion recommendations a month, and that's around 1.4 billion unique consumers. What that equates down to when you look at time on site, you look at where someone's come from and source, you look at where 20% of them go to in terms of clicking on our links, it gives us around 800 to 1,200 pieces of data on a consumer before we make a recommendation to them. And that's pretty significant. It gives us two views of a massive data set, and that's why I just wanted to run through these pretty quickly. I'll happily share the deck with anyone who wants it, so no need to take pictures or anything if something sparks your interest. Category deep dives. Category deep dives is where we look at the supply and demand of content around any given structure, any given topic on our network. So you won't be able to read these, but I'll tell you what it is. When we do a deep dive, we look at a 1 month snapshot. This is 7.86 million Australians in 1 month, which was August this year. And we looked at 46,000 pieces of travel content. Within this, on your left-hand side, you can see how many pieces of content there were relating to different destinations across the network. On this side, you can see the demand, so the click-through rate. What's interesting here is you start being able to see the difference of what's being written about versus what consumers are actually clicking on. That has an impact for lots of different things. Business understanding, SEO on your site, if you take it as a proxy for search. It also has an impact on working with us because we work on a quality score on a click basis. So higher click-through rate, as in greater demand, means it's cheaper for you. We can do this kind of analysis across lots of different topics and look at it in different ways. With a clicker that doesn't work. It's dead. Coming up, there's a lovely infographic type thing. It's working on my screen, but not on this. I'd sing you a song, but it's not going to work. Wish I could rap. Now my screen's gone dead. Oh, good. Talk amongst yourselves. What will be coming up is a load of different infographics around, and lots of different supply and demand curves around different industries. And it's showing, again, what we can look at in terms of the data and how we can start interpreting that as to what consumers are actually interested in. Thought that might get me there, but no. Desperately trying to think of a good joke. The only one I can think of is the first joke my son ever told me, which was, what's the time when an elephant sits on your bed? Time to get a new bed. I only have dad jokes. That's all I've got. Hey, infographic. There's an infographic, like I said. Again, we can start looking at the topics by destination and who's interested in what where. One of the other things that we get, which is interesting, is the time on site and where that comes from in terms of publishers and Outbrain, search, social, and we see how many pages are consumed when a referral goes through. We also see here the referring category, and where I find this really interesting is the third one down here for travel is war and conflict. What we've started looking into is the correlation of people reading nasty things and then wanting sort of remove their headspace and go somewhere nice. So you're on the BBC, you're reading something about Aleppo, all of a sudden there's something down the bottom that's, do you want to go to Fiji? The mind does what we would do in most physical situations. We're uncomfortable, we go somewhere comfortable. We can carve travel data as an example down in different ways. So we can look at what are the attributes, so not only destinations, but what are the attributes inside the content that people are interested in. So we worked with one hotel client whose big thing is that they have 6 different types of pillows. So when you look here and some of the sleep words come out, that becomes really central to what they're pushing forward in their strategy. Again, we can look at different markets and what's important, service, airports, destinations. We can refine these down so we can really start understanding what the audience wants to understand. And again, we start seeing the differences in supply and demand and what's out there. We can see it here. Transportation, it's pretty matched on supply and demand. In other areas, you see massive opportunities to create good content and have conversations where there isn't content consumers want, and in other places there's massive oversupply. Again, looking at time on site, we understand where people have come from and where they're spending their time. We can also look at the platform that they're using. Different trends and expectations per market. This is a study we did around parenting in the Philippines, Malaysia, and Singapore. And word cloud is a bit messy in terms of what people want to look at, and I'll come back to what people want to look at in those markets in a second. But one of the things we do look at is what people are looking at in a category and what's the peak time of consumption. So in Singapore, peak time of consumption is 10 p.m. Car, childcare, savings, breastfeeding, sleep, nutrition. That to me is as they've just got the kids to bed and they're thinking, oh shit, these are the things I need to do either tomorrow or moving forward. I see parents in the audience and yeah. What's interesting is in Malaysia, same parenting set of articles and content, different set of words, different time, 8 a.m. That's usually either just got the kids out the door and, oh shit, what do I need to do now? Or it's a day off and what do I need to do and plan and watch, stop, toddler. I think that's great. Again, interesting one is in the Philippines, it's 4 p.m. Peak consumption and parenting content. That to me is when the kids have just gotten home from school. Ask Amy is, I think, the Washington Post's columnist about parenting tips. And you see in some of the words here, but when you go into the deep dive of the Philippines, what's actually really interesting is there's really different sets of keywords for new parents. In Singapore, like it says car and breastfeeding, nutrition, there's also talking about savings for education. There's talking about tutors. That's very different to Malaysia. And then in the Philippines, there's a lot more content around how-to, too early, how-to guides. And one of the things we realized with that was in the Philippines, you have an emerging middle class that are doing things with their kids that their parents didn't do for them. So disposable nappies, milk formula, various other items. So they're looking for advice online. They're reading up. We can start looking at correlations of data as well when we do into those deep dives. So families with young children are interested in beach holidays, outdoor activities, and childcare. As a parent, I like to think of all three of those at once. A beach holiday with activities while someone else looks after the kids. We can also, when we look at the thematic breakdown, we can start seeing the difference again of what people want, what's out there. And in Malaysia, you have a hell of a lot of people writing advice and how-tos, and the demand just isn't there. Whereas in the Philippines, as I alluded to, the guides and the how-tos are really popular. So it's just understanding what those different gaps are. And again, in the guides, we can break down who's looking for it geographically across the Philippines. It's gone again. Yeah, there we go. So this is, and I'll run through these really quickly, but Automotive Insights, and again, looking very different per market and what's out there. Again, really different on supply and demand. What people are really interested in is practicality and driving experience. No one's providing that content. So again, opportunities, we can look at brands, where the brands are in demand, where they aren't, and understand where we can help shift the needle for advertisers. There's a sex one, just because usually if I'm presenting this to agencies, they're looking at their phone by now. So that's keywords of sex across Asia. And again, this isn't searched. This is what people are actually reading. So there you go. And again, the supply and demand, just because I'm 12 years old and it makes me chuckle. So that's one set of data we have, one view of data on the category deep dives, really understanding what's happening in a particular category so we can work with people to understand. The second is the personal interest profile. And this is where I think there's a massive difference on what's out there in social and what we have, where we're looking at what people really read, what people actually consume, and the difference between what's out there. So we work with our advertisers, obviously, to match those interests with the advertisers at the right place and the right time. So I'll go back to my first two points around people like people, as in people you like, share your interests. So most social networks, there's a premise of tell me who your friends are and we'll tell you what you like. That doesn't work. The truth is it needs to be content-based. So understanding the affinity of the user to each content and topic and all of those entities that I talked about and the historical consumption. And also the collaborative affinity. So understanding the affinity of each user to each piece of content. The friend piece, big red disclaimer down the bottom, does have an impact and can have an impact. However, if you look at it mathematically, it's mostly to explain anomalies rather than to make better predictions. Another little bit of work we did was looking at, do people really share the real them? So a couple of doctorates who worked for us analysed a couple of billion pieces of information, and they looked at all of the data that we have across our network. And that means every single piece of content. So it doesn't mean if you found it through us, it means every single page on the BBC, CNN, Straits Times, everything else. So whether it came through us or not, we see who read it, how long they read it, where they went to next. And we started noticing the difference between what people like and interests. And the guys came up with this natty little term, the private social dissonance. And in the study, it's really interesting. So up the top, you've got what people really read, what people really consume. Then at the bottom, you've got what's shared on Facebook. So natural disasters, education, art, architecture, career, parenting, insurance, home improvement. That's the Facebook ego you. The real you is reading about the Kardashians or your favorite sports team. And this is when you think of it in the context that billions of dollars of advertising are going towards something built on your interest profile, which is based around something that doesn't reflect you, that's something to really think about. And again, I go back to the parenting piece. I'm a big Facebook user. I'm a very happy parent, and a few people in here will know that most of my Facebook posts are about my son. What I'm also reading is about his development, his education, his physical development, what to expect next. All of these things that are happening for me as a parent, that doesn't go on Facebook. Though there's a massive difference between this private social dissonance, the things that you read that matter to you. The things, and that might be parenting, and that's quite an evocative one. It might be reading car reviews. It might be reading phone reviews. There's just a massive difference between that public persona and the private persona. And that's the formula, if any geeks want to work it out. So to do this, to illustrate some of this, I did this morning. I went onto my Facebook feed and I found the publisher sort of based shares that were coming from my network. I've redacted names because some people may be in the room. This was an anti-Trump sign up for Obamacare Now piece that came up. Next was around gun crime in the US. Next, another gun crime in the US. Then AI, amazing technology, aren't humans smart? If you could delete anything from the world, what would it be? All very ethereal, nice, I'm politically smart, I'm in tune, isn't the world lovely and great, or it's shit and we should fix it, and aren't I great because I've put this up? I then went through the top publishers across the region and looked at the articles that are most read. So again, not from us, but from the publishers in total. In Australia in October, this was the #1 read article that was out there. Sorry, this was the #2. I didn't want to share #1 because it was not very nice. This was #3. To all you highbrow Aussies, this is across the major publications in Australia. This is what people are really reading. In Malaysia, I don't know who Hans Isaac is, but that was #1 most read article in Malaysia across all of our network, which is about 90% reach in Malaysia. Fake dentist gave herself away. Government in the Philippines. Photos of Alex Jazz Mercado. Again, I have no idea who that is. And in Singapore, it's about the moving out and the stamping in Golden Mile complex. That doesn't necessarily give a huge amount of insight to me, other than I think we need to look a little bit deeper when we're looking at the social tools and the targeting tools that are out there, and think of our own behavior in terms of what we consume versus what we share. And I think it brings me back to those digital moments. So search, I didn't coin the phrase, but search is the database of human intention. It's a data set that no one can argue with. It's absolutely amazing. It is transactional. It is like a Yellow Pages, just a very glorified and money-making one. But it's an amazing data set. On social, it is ego-driven. It's what we want people to think. It's what we think it's cool to like or share. It's not necessarily the values that we really hold true. It's not necessarily what's really going on in our lives. It's very different. And then discovery, what people are really consuming, what people are really taking on board, and the pre-search moment, that moment of genesis of an idea. You might know you want to go away for a long weekend, but until you see something that says, hey, how about Bali? That might not have been in your consideration set. So the pre-search moment as well. And that's that. Thank you very much. Take a seat. Yep.
Difficulties, we do have time for a few questions. So if you do have a question, raise your hand. But Finn, I have one for you just to kick things off. Obviously, the basis of your presentation was there's a difference between what we share and what we consume, and that disconnect. And one of the examples you cited was the news.com.au article with Sophie Monk and whether she's still with Stu. But
Is she? But,
no, she's not. I don't think she is, but I don't know. But I'm increasingly reading about that on Facebook, and I'm finding that Facebook is almost now starting to catch up more with those consumption habits. So are brands and publishers sort of cottoning on to that? Because I would almost argue that in the past decade, my Facebook has become much more sort of driven by that sort of content that you secretly consume.
It's driven by what they think you want to see. So, and I have a fundamental issue with that because that caused Brexit and Trump to be elected. And I flat out believe that a million %. So I think publishers have become more savvy in terms of realizing that they need to publish things themselves and get it out there. Whether you're seeing it is usually based on whether a friend of yours has liked it, you've liked something like it in the past, and whether Facebook deems it that you should see it. And this is kind of the danger, both in terms of the interest information they have is very skewed and one-sided, and what they push to you is very skewed and one-sided. Some people use Facebook in different ways, and if you're someone who uses it to read up on Sophie Monk and those things, you're going to see more and more of that. It is a recommendation engine, and it is there to show what's more relevant for you. But it's still going to tend to be in the entertainment sphere only, as opposed to, again, like reading about your child's development. You know, I can't ever see Facebook recommending an article saying, has your kid got Tourette's? So I think the publishers are getting better at using it as a tool to amplify, and Facebook's getting better. Well, it's either getting better or worse, depending on your opinion. But it's an echo chamber. So unless it's a pure advert, it's very rare that it's going to show you something unless some of your circle have liked it. And usually with most adverts, they'll only show you if it's someone you know's liked it as well.
Are there any questions from the crowd? And if there are, can you raise your hand and we will pass you a microphone. In the meantime, though, let's talk more about that echo chamber. How can you break out of it? I mean, it seems like you mentioned the Brexit and the Trump thing. Certain people were surprised by those outcomes. How can we make it so that it's not surprising?
I think Facebook wished more than anything that they could break out of the echo chamber that they created. They're giving people content that they believe those people want, but that can be very dangerous. I think one of the biggest things is people need to not use Facebook as a news source. I think that's, you know, ignoring fake news and those things, just the like-mindedness of your brethren on Facebook, just using that for news is very one-sided. And I think that Facebook have realized that when you get to a couple of billion users and you can start swaying elections, they probably wish they hadn't built quite as an effective echo chamber as they have.
And do you think Facebook has ambitions to be a sort of content curation and publisher, or do you think that they've ended up there accidentally?
I think they absolutely want to curate content, and I think that they're already a publisher and they're already a content creator. I don't think they necessarily wanted the power it yields. I don't think they necessarily understood the responsibility that comes with that. Was it Spider-Man or Batman? With great power comes great responsibility, whoever it was. And when you can, was that Spider-Man? Cool. When you can influence, nigh on a third of the world's population, the fact that they're only now investing in people to identify fake news and to call that out is massive. We stopped fake news through Outbrain 6 years ago, so before fake news was fake news. That came at a huge expense to our business. We lost between 20 to 30% of our revenue. About 18 months ago, we massively pulled back from listicles and top 20 celebrities who died before they were 20, or you won't believe what happens when this shark swims past the boat, and the shark just swims past the boat. And again, that came at massive cost to us, and it's about trying to do the right thing. We also realise that our advertisers don't want to appear next to fake news. It's, that with Breitbart and all of those other issues that are out there that Google and Facebook are going through, you've got to watch who you're appearing next to as well. That's a massive issue, not only the page that you're on, but who else is sitting next to you as an advertiser.
Do people even know what they want, though? I mean, you mentioned that you won't believe what this shark will do, and you know that you shouldn't click on it because you know it's going to be a disappointment, but you click on it anyway, and then you hate yourself. So there's almost like this hate clicking thing going on. So do we even know what we want to be consuming anymore?
Well, one of the things that we're looking at, which is quite interesting, so for years we had accusations around fake news, accusations around clickbait and all of these things. And to a point, not the fake news, but especially the clickbait, some of it was true, but the single largest determinator of what is put in front of you is what you've clicked on in the past. So if you constantly click on the top 20 lists and those things, then you're going to get showed them more and more. What we're doing more and more work with on the algorithms is showing you the right content at the right time. So it might be 11:30 and you've just got your cup of tea and a donut and you want to sit down and you might be interested in seeing a listicle or something that's happened there, but in the middle of your workday when you're researching, looking at the BBC business section, it's probably not right. So we're trying to work that out, but I think the answer is most consumers know they don't know what they want, and if you give them what they want at the wrong time, they complain. So it's trying to work that through.
A delicate balance. I think we have a question down here. Is there a microphone?
Yep.
Oh, you've got it?
Great.
Daniel Filer from eBay. Finn, a great presentation. I really
Thank you.
enjoyed that. I just curious, you just talked about Facebook not being in a position which they didn't think they would be in. Why have you made that conclusion necessarily about Facebook?
I was being kind. Look, I think look, you can say there's a grand master plan, and maybe there was. I mean, if you look into Cambridge Analytica and all of the data points and everything that happened around Trump and all of those areas, if you're being nice, you'd say they were unaware and it just happened. If you were being nasty, you'd say they didn't give a shit, and let that happen and be manipulated. I don't know what the truth is. Yeah.
All right, everyone, I can hear claps emanating from other rooms, and so I think we probably need to wrap up. Before we thank Finn, a quick note that we're reconvening at 3 for the Pursuit of the Shot Lessons in Content Marketing. Obviously, you can use your app to work out what's going on at all the other stages. But for now, please join me in thanking Finn for a fantastic session.
Thank you.